to the Inside Scoop Virginia. My name is Shannon Sullivan. I'll be your host this evening. Tonight we're going to be talking about the Employee Free Choice Act, perhaps a little-known piece of federal legislation to those outside the labor and the business community, but will actually radically change the National Labor Relations Act in order to make it easier for workers to join a union and to negotiate for better contracts so that wages and working conditions and benefits better reflect what it takes to live in today's society. I have with me today Bill Samuel, who is the Director of Government Affairs for the AFL-CIO, and we're going to be discussing this fundamentally important piece of legislation to both the labor and the business community. Thank you for joining me, Bill.
Thank you, Shannon. I'm glad to be here.
We were talking a little bit before the show about the state of the economy and how not just this piece of legislation, but labor in general has to kind of step up to the bat. I think that you might have a viewpoint to share with us.
Right.
There.
Well, the news, of course, all weekend has been about the financial collapse and the congressional response to that. Actually, there are some eerie similarities to the conditions in 1929 and 2008, and one of those is the lack of bargaining power that workers experience today. In 1929, we had a great inequality of wealth. 50% of the wealth was earned and owned by the top 10% of the income ladder, and that's about where we are today. And those great inequalities in wealth led to the Great Depression, the stock market crash. I think it has a role to play in today's financial crisis. People are having to borrow money to survive, and one of the reasons we think we have this great gap in wealth is because workers have lost a lot of the power that they once had to bargain for better wages to get a share of national income growth, and we've been seeing that for the past 30 years.
Absolutely. And I know for Virginia workers, we do live in a right-to-work state, and there's a lot of misconceptions about what that means. And I think the comparison does need to be drawn between union wages and those in non-union areas. Union members actually earn 30% higher wages, I found out.
That's right.
And I believe that they are 62% more likely to have employer-based healthcare systems and 4 times more likely to have a pension program.
Right. Most Americans don't realize, maybe they don't remember, the critical role unions played in building the middle class. In the middle of the last century, when unions were strong and they could bargain for a share of the productivity growth and the profits that they were helping to generate, they got something in return. They got health insurance benefits, they got pensions, they got wages that kept up with prices. It was critical to the development of the middle class and the strength of the middle class, and we're seeing that erode today. And it's not an accident that one of the reasons middle class living standards are eroding and weakening is because the power of workers has diminished. And I saw a recent poll that among the American public, they believe by a 75% margin the corporations are too powerful today. And it's not surprising because workers feel very much victims in today's economy. And again, going back to the middle part of the last century, we had a relatively balanced economy. We had a government that regulated a business, we had a strong business sector, and we had a labor sector. And the three worked pretty well together to make sure that the income distribution was fair, and that as the economy grew, everybody shared in those benefits, and we've lost that in the last 20 years. Government is weaker, unions are weaker, corporations are stronger.
Absolutely, and I think that what's the ratio between the average worker's wage and the average CEO's wage? Is some 300-400?
That's a very good point. Back in the 1960s and 70s, again, when we had this balance between business, labor, and government, it was 40 to 50 times the corporate executive made as opposed to the shop floor worker. Now it's 300, 400, 500 times bigger. It's by far the biggest gap in income of any industrialized country, and it's why we're seeing people so anxious about their future.
I don't think that a average CEO, I don't care what's your skill level, your education level, your productivity level, that 500 times your average worker's wage scale can be justified.
Well, and they're not even necessarily getting paid for succeeding. We've heard over the past few months and years stories of CEOs taking companies down and at the same time getting huge golden parachutes. Carly Fiorina, Hewlett Packard, one of John McCain's chief advisors, took a $40 million a golden parachute. Her company
Shameful.
had lost half of its value while she was the chief executive officer.
I do believe that's why it's a crucial part of the supposed bailout package that the Democrats and the Republicans are talking about right now, to limit the corporate compensation, those golden parachutes, the excessive benefits that, even in failure, that these individuals are getting.
That's right. Well, the public is outraged about it, and I'm not surprised. They're limiting executive pay for companies that participate in the bailout, I think, to $400,000 a year, which is not too shabby.
I think that the average CEO could make do with that.
That's right.
We've kind of glossed over what the Employee Free Choice Act is designed to do. What it's addressing, I believe it's the National Labor Relations Act. It's a 70-year-old bill, and by all accounts, it's broken.
Right.
The way, and this is how I interpret it right now, the way businesses relate to unions have changed. And so the Employee Free Choice is being used to address those changes in the law.
That's right. For many years now, really decades, business has been ratcheting up its opposition to workers who want to form unions. We now have companies bigger than countries, like Walmart is a good example. They make it nearly impossible for workers to get together, to join together, to bargain, to form unions and bargain for better wages and benefits. They've used loopholes in the law, the basic weakening of the law, the lack of enforcement. Business has changed its way of doing business and the way it deals with workers who want to form unions. The law hasn't changed, as you said, in practically 70 years, 1935 when it was first enacted. It's got to be updated, and one of the ways we want to update it is to help workers meet this increasing opposition of employers to their rights.
And I do believe a part of that is the fundamental change of the moral obligation that employers look upon their job and their employees. You know, that there is not that necessity to be able to provide benefits and wages that are able to put people in a solid middle class and living wage.
Right. There used to be sort of the social compact that
it's not existing anymore.
It doesn't really exist. One of the reasons is companies really aren't rooted in the United States anymore. They're global corporations. They may have headquarters here, they may have headquarters anywhere, but capital moves around the globe. Their production can move very quickly behind the capital that they export, and as a result, they don't feel particularly committed to maintaining a middle class in this country, and we see that you know, in every part of the country. And so their desire to help workers earn enough to buy their products is really much greatly diminished. Remember, Henry Ford understood that he had to pay his workers enough to buy his products. That's not really the case anymore in this country.
Yeah, just ask the average Walmart employee.
That's right.
The Employee Free Choice Act is a bipartisan piece of legislation. I believe at the last count there were 44 senators and 215 representatives that have signed on to this bill. It was put forth in March of '07. It passed the House of Representatives by a good margin.
A very substantial 241 to 185.
Yeah, there are some good numbers.
I think I'm right,
it is stalled in the Senate.
It is stalled in the Senate by a filibuster. We had a vote, I guess it was in June of 2007. We got 51 votes. It takes 60 to break a filibuster. Every Democrat voted for cloture, which ends the debate. One was absent, who was ill, so we would have had 52 votes. And we had one Republican, Arlen Specter from Pennsylvania. He's one of the original co-sponsors of the bill, who said it was bipartisan. It is to that extent in the Senate, every Democrat and one Republican. In the House, actually, it really is bipartisan. We have probably a dozen House Republican co-sponsors, and they voted for it when it was up in March of 2007, as you said.
Wonderful. And this Employee Free Choice Act, I do believe, got a veto solicitation from George W. Bush, which ratcheted up the pressure.
The Bush administration is opposed to this bill. Most of his corporate allies are opposed to it. John McCain is opposed to it. Going back to your original question about what it's about, it makes it easier for workers to form unions, and basically what it says is three parts to it. But one part is if more than half the workers want to form a union, they should be able to form a union. They can sign an authorization card, they can sign a petition, and once 50% plus one sign that, the employer should have to begin bargaining with that group of workers who've decided to join together to bargain for better wages. Right now, under current law, the company can take a showing of interest of 30% of workers when they decide they want to form a union, and then kind of derail that choice by 30% and say we want to have an election before we'll agree to sit down and bargain. And that precipitates a campaign by the company to defeat the union organizing drive, which can last anywhere from 3 to 4, 5 months or longer. During that time, a lot of reasons we can get into, but the employer has a lot of control over the situation and can threaten and coerce and fire workers who want to form the union. By the time you get to the election, it's very often the campaign has stalled.
Well, I think you made several very good points there. That one, the employer actually has the choice whether to go to an election or to accept that the majority of the workers have actually signed the cards. So this isn't something that's radically overhauling what the practice is.
Right. A lot of people think this is a big change. First of all, if you go back to 1935, this was the way unions originally organized through a process called card check or majority sign-up. They call it card check because the union could present cards to the employer signed by 50% plus one of the workforce. The employer then had to begin bargaining. That was essentially the election. That's still possible today, only it is at the discretion of the employer. The employer can either accept those cards and begin bargaining, or he or she can decide to hold an election, meaning the employees then have to go through this campaign period. This really a campaign of terror. I mean, if you're at
well, and I think you also said the length of the campaign itself.
It can go for weeks or months. There'll be challenges. It can end up in court. Meanwhile, you're talking about a workforce which is, basically they go to work trying to hold on to their job. And if an employer is so determined to defeat the union, they will make it nearly impossible for a worker to feel like he or she has a free choice, which they are supposed to have under the law.
And it's not something that we're trying to exaggerate, that these are conditions that happen in just a rare, occasion of organizing campaigns. Kate Brofenbrenner at the Cornell University, she's a labor scholar and a professor there. She did a study of National Labor Relations Board elections and found that 25% of all of those organizing drives, employees were fired.
Right, somebody ends up getting fired. In 90% or more than 90%, the employer hires an anti-union consultant. This is $1 billion industry now in this country. You're asked what's changed since the 1930s. One thing is we have this huge industry of anti-union lawyers and advisors, which companies bring in at the first sign of a union showing up at work, at their workplace. And they're very skilled in all the tools it takes to convince the employees that the worst thing for them would be to form a union. They go into this process thinking it would be a good thing. The employer, over the period of this anti-union campaign, oftentimes convinces them it would be a dangerous thing to form a union. It's hard to see why, when basically what the union is doing is helping workers join together again to bargain for better wages and benefits.
Now, I should be, fully, disclosing here. I do work for a local union. I work for the United Food and Commercial Workers, Local 400, and I do work as a union organizer. So when I try to play the con side or the devil's advocate, the opposition puts forward that you're taking away someone's democratic choice. The ballot, the secret ballot, is something we do revere in American society, and that by doing so, someone is going to be coerced or intimidated by the union thugs, myself. When we go to you and we're going to be discussing the opportunities of joining a union, somehow, and I read in the National Right to Work Foundation's literature, the Heritage Foundation's literature, that we are coercive, we intimidate, we threaten, we bribe, and we are very much, strong-arming people to see our side and to sign those authorization cards. Now, those are legal documents, and to me, you don't slightly go about it when you have someone sign that information. So, I think we're going to go into the con side a little bit more, how the National Right to Work Foundation and their Legal Defense Fund looks at intimidation, and we'll see that side and what our guest Bill Samuel has to say about that. In a few minutes, we'll be right back. Thank you so much.
How far would you go to help someone? go to the end of your driveway? Would you cross a street? Would you cross an ocean? To a place 6,000 miles from home? And how long would you go? Would you go for a week? A month? A year? Would you go for 2 years? Would you go if you could use your knowledge to teach someone, and in the process, maybe learn something yourself? Life is calling. How far will you go? Peace Corps.
Monica wants a pet dog. How about you?
Welcome back. My name is Shannon Sullivan. I'm your host this evening for the Inside Scoop Virginia. We are talking about the Employee Free Choice Act, which is a federal piece of legislation designed to allow workers that are interested in joining the union an opportunity in a simple and fair process by the right of signing a union authorization card. If the majority of people sign up that they want a union, you have one. I do have with me Bill Samuel, who's the Director of Government Affairs for the AFL-CIO, and we were discussing prior to the break some of the, I guess, the con side. I'm playing a little bit of the devil's advocate today. We had invited the National Right to Work Foundation to join us today. I must say they had other obligations and they had to back out at the last minute.
Big football game tonight.
Well, you know, I was going to go into a whole
home.
David Letterman, you know, being dismissed by John McCain, but I think we'll save that for another show. I do know that part of the opposition that they put forward, or part of the argument, is that there's intimidation that goes on the union organizer's part. And I've disclosed that I'm a union organizer. I work with the United Food and Commercial Workers, and I kind of find the persona of being thuggish a little amusing.
Yeah.
I know I've seen.
You don't look like big labor to me.
Oh, that is, and the terminology is big labor.
No, I mean, I think the mischaracterization is really it's astounding to me when they talk about the thuggish union organizers out there. First of all, most places that are organizing are hospitals, schools, offices, some factories. You know, the economy's changing much more. White collar service sector, retail, healthcare is a big field. Nursing is a big field where there's organizing going on. And for the most part, these organizers are co-workers. The organizing committee is made up of co-workers. The union representative is not allowed on the property. People don't understand how union organizing is done. The union may be contacted by a worker and meet with a group of workers off-site to talk about how they can organize a union. But the organizing is done by the workers in the workplace. Again, under our laws in this country, union organizers are not allowed on the property of an employer. So this notion that these thugs are going to show up and scare people is just, and there's no evidence that it happens. We've had, you know, union organizing going on in this country again since the 1930s. There are virtually no cases where a worker has been coerced by the union to sign an authorization card or vote for the union. In fact, if that happens, and occasionally there are a handful of cases over the decades, it's really the union gets the death penalty. The election is overthrown. There is no union if the union is found to have coerced. Oh,
the laws are very much against us in that way, and as they should be. You know, if someone is using undue and unnecessary, you know, force, you know, we're talking about someone's future here, and we want to be able to put in the fairest way, you know, possible that this is, you know, providing for better wages and working conditions. And the card that we put forth, you know, we call it a union authorization card. It's a legal document. It's saying you want us to represent you, and I don't know a union organizer out there that goes about making light of that signature.
Well, it would clearly turn off the worker if the worker felt pressured or if they felt that they weren't being treated respectfully. Yeah, people, again, these are adults. They're making decisions about forming a union, joining. It's very much like joining a church or a political party. They're grown-ups. They can make that decision. They don't have to make it in front of the worker, their co-worker who's handed them the card. They can take it and think about it, turn in the card later.
To me, it almost makes it a more private decision.
Right. And it happens now. Again, even in the current system, workers sign an authorization card, and again, if 30% say they want to form a union, the employer then is allowed to trigger this election. So workers already sign
Have
cards.
those rights.
The only thing this law would change is that if 50% sign them and say they want to form the union, there's no election.
Well, first off, I don't know any union out there that would file for an election with less than 50%. Usually the standard's 70, 75%.
Right.
They want to know that there's the overwhelming majority, not just 50 plus 1, out there that support this effort. And, I just find it funny that, it's not surprising that the employer will push for an election. Of course, you're stretching out the length of time, which allows for the intimidation and the coercion to go on.
Right.
And if a majority has already recognized the union, it's up to them to just say it's
Right.
in.
It's really not up to the employer. I think one thing that most Americans don't really get about this, if they bother to think about it, it's not really up to the employer whether there's a union. It's up to the workers. What CEO would go to work at a major corporation without a contract?
Oh, they have multi-billion dollars. We already talked about parachutes.
Right. all these corporations, corporation heads, CEOs, executives have contracts, and they have lawyers to negotiate those contracts for them. The only thing a union does is it allows the workers to decide to hire a lawyer to negotiate a contract for them, to determine what their salary will be, what the terms and conditions of that job will be, and whether or not they can get health insurance and a pension. It's really not up to the employer.
Now, the other part that the devil's advocate in me is saying, the secret ballot election, it's being termed, because we're going in the route of card check, to simplify it and make it a fair process. You're taking away that secret ballot, that it's undemocratic, it's un-American. And I just want to play a short clip for you. This is from the Education and Labor Committee, and we have Gordon Lafer, I believe I may be pronouncing that correctly. He's the professor at the University of Oregon, is going to be talking about how there isn't really a secret ballot, even when people are going to the ballot box.
Or not the kind of secret ballot you think of when you think of an election.
And this is what union campaigns are encountering every single day. So if you want to bear with me and watch this for a moment, it's a few-minute clip.
How secret is the secret ballot really?
In the American democratic tradition, the principle of the secret ballot is not simply the fact that you go into a voting booth and pull a curtain and nobody sees what you do. It is your right to keep your political opinion private to yourself before, during, and after the act of voting, that you can't be lured or coerced into a conversation that is designed to make you reveal your political preferences. In the NLRB, while the vote does take place in a booth where nobody sees what you're doing, management is allowed to engage in a series of behaviors in the lead up to the vote that force the vast majority of workers to reveal how they're going to vote long before they ever step into the booth. It is illegal for a supervisor to ask a worker directly, how are you going to vote? And for that reason, the standard practice of employers and consultants is to coach supervisors to have intensive, what they call eyeball-to-eyeball conversations with every one of the people they oversee, the most intimidating kind of conversation, and ask them questions that avoid that explicit language, but force them to reveal their preferences. They make provocative statements, they record what the worker says, they watch their body language, they go back and they rank them on a scale of 1 to 5 of where they stand, and one consultant reports that he would regularly hold a poll among managers for $100 to see who could guess the correct number of votes that the election would be, and they were always astonishingly accurate within a few votes. So under those conditions, under that intimidating condition, if you are a supremely skilled actor or liar, you can keep your opinion unknown. But for most normal people, you end up revealing where you stand, and the fact that you then go into a secret ballot at the end of the day doesn't change that.
So technically, while they're not violating the rules by asking explicit questions, if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, they've grown very sophisticated at other ways in which they're able to get that information from workers before they actually step in and vote.
That's right. And I think if we saw this happening in any other country, that workers were interrogated in this manner, even though they ended up in a secret booth, we would say the secret ballot existed in name only.
Thank you. I had
All right.
That's a great explanation for what a secret ballot is in the context of a union election. It's nothing like a civic or political election. We often say that if a member of Congress had to run the gauntlet in an election like union workers do, or workers who want to form a union, they would never put up with it.
Well, I've actually known campaigns where there is a gauntlet of security officers hired, I won't use the word thug, but security officers that are under the control or under the payroll of the employer.
Very intimidating.
Lining the road to the ballot box.
Right, very intimidating. And in fact, if you compare secret ballot elections in civic or political elections to union elections, there's nothing similar about them. In fact, Human Rights Watch basically compares a union election in the U.S. to the kind of elections they used to have in the old Soviet Union and the Ukraine and communist countries, where they had a secret ballot, so-called. At the end of the day, we went into a voting booth, but there was nothing free or fair about it, and that's what the secret ballot election is like in the union context.
Yeah. I do want to also open this up to our viewing audience. If you've been in an organizing drive, either as a worker trying to organize for the first time, or even if you are organizing for the first contract, you've already gotten the union in and you're trying to work through those steps to get your first contract, give us a call. The number here is 571-749-1166. And of course, I'd like to talk to all of those union thugs out there. What's your experience?
I'd like to meet one.
I mean, the timeline it takes to go through a complete organizing drive, the intimidation, the coercion, the fear of firing. Yeah. I know I've talked to a lot of first-time organizers, and that's probably the moment that sticks in your head forever. Yeah. You know, the first person that gets fired.
Well, imagine you're a low-wage worker. You're having trouble making ends meet. You've got a mortgage, maybe a car payment, credit card. You finally got a job. And you decide maybe you're not being treated fairly, you'd like to get a raise, maybe there are some health and safety issues at work. The scariest thing is when your supervisor says you really don't want to do this, you really don't want to have, you don't want to vote for the union, it's not going to be good for your career. Well, again, if you're just hanging on economically, which so many people are today, that can be extremely intimidating. And then that's followed up with maybe another meeting the next day. These what we call captive audience meetings, where supervisors are allowed to take workers aside on company time and on company property and make the argument over and over again about why the workers shouldn't choose a union. The union folks have no similar opportunity to do that. Again, they're not allowed on the premises. So this is why we say this is nothing like an election or a campaign that people think of in the political context.
I do believe I'd read that those captive audience meetings occur in 92% of all organizing drives.
They happen all the time. In fact, supervisors can be threatened. They're not protected by the law. So if an employer says to their supervisors, make sure that the people in your unit
you're sure they will.
Don't vote for this, don't vote for the union, you do what you have to do or you're out of here, that's not illegal. It is illegal, supposedly, to threaten the worker. Of course, that happens all the time, and as you said, in about 25% of the cases, someone's fired.
I think the point is to be made, these are subtle threats.
Right.
Maybe it'll be outsourced,
Right.
Maybe we'll just have to close the doors,
Right.
But your pay may be reduced, you may lose that promotion, or maybe it's that you'll get it.
Right.
So when we come back, we're going to be talking about the other side of the Employee Free Choice Act, which is the negotiations and the pros and the cons as we go into that. I'll be right with you in one more moment.
Rebecca wants a pet dog. How about you? Choose right. There are many kinds of dogs. Spirited, playful, dogs of all sizes. Make sure you have enough space for your dog. You'll need to feed him healthy food. Every dog needs walks, loving care, good hygiene, visits to the vet, and updated vaccines. This way, your new friend will live a long and happy life.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. Well, it's a matches and that's no good. Yeah. Listen to smoke before you give it a try.
Only you.
Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. There's nothing very funny about ripped off life, nothing very nice on a homeless mind. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches, don't play with fire. Yeah.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire!
The dream of education beyond high school, the cost can put it out of reach. There is help. We are Federal Student Aid, part of the U.S. Department of Education. Each year we award $80 billion to all eligible students and families. Learn more at federalstudentaid.ed.gov. Don't get left behind. The most costly education is the one not begun. Federal Student Aid. Start here. Go further.
Welcome back. This is the Inside Scoop Virginia, and we're talking about a federal issue today, the Employee Free Choice Act. And where we left off, we were talking about the contract negotiation side of any organizing drive. And I do have with me Bill Samuel, who is the Director of Government Affairs for the AFL-CIO. Bill, maybe you want to lead in what this the second component of the Employee Free Choice Act actually addresses.
Right, there are three components. The first one is the majority sign-up, which we talked about. The second component is a provision which would address one of the other major problems in current labor management relations, which is getting that first contract. Yep. People, I think, would be surprised to learn that in about a third of the cases where workers survive the anti-union campaign, they actually vote for a union. The union begins to bargain a contract. In a third of those cases, there is never an agreement on the first contract. This is also part of the employer strategy. It's something that anti-union consultants advise companies on how to do, how to drag out negotiations, how to bargain in a way that you'll never, end up with an agreement with the union. And one of the reasons they do that, by the way, is after a year, if there's no agreement, the workers may be asked again to vote. You still want a union, and if there hasn't been a contract and there's been a lot of negotiations and maybe some ill will on the part of the employer for having voted for the union, the workers may decide maybe it wasn't such a good idea. Yeah,
I have to say, it's criminal. I don't think that those that haven't gone through an organizing campaign as a worker before understand the sacrifice that, the time and the sacrifice, and I think that's the right word, that you go through. You're putting your job on the line, and you're wishing, you have that hope for a better future, and you're just hoping that the majority of your coworkers feel the same way. And you finally get to that point, you haven't been fired, and you have a union, and you celebrate. But then there's this additional, and they call it the contract campaign, that begins. I know unions that have had contract campaigns that have gone on for years, and basically in the sense that the employer just shuts the door. Right. You've won representation for people, which means you have a legal obligation to them, and that's what I find offensive. You have a union representative that's there to grieve anything in that workplace that's done wrong to these people, and the door's just shut in their face. And there's no recourse. Right. So the recourse in the bill and the Employee Free Choice Act is that for that first contract, which is really the toughest hurdle to get over, again, we have an employer and a group of workers who've never bargained before. It's a new situation. If the union is voted in, bargaining will begin, but if after 90 days, 3 months of bargaining, there's no contract, either side can ask for federal mediation. A neutral third party can come in, bring the parties together, offer ways that maybe they can get over some of these hurdles. If after another 30 days there's no agreement, an arbitrator, again a neutral third party, will come in, look at both sides, and impose an agreement which will last no longer than 2 years. This provision, this contract arbitration provision, actually is part of the law in Canada. And what it actually does is for the most part, it acts as a brake on the employer who doesn't want to bargain, and on the union that may not want to agree to terms. In most cases in Canada, I think 80–90% of the time, the parties reach an agreement on their own. They don't want a third party coming in and making that decision for them. So it's really mostly a threat. But there will be cases where the union and the company can't get together, and after, I guess, 4 months, that the arbitrator will settle that contract for them. It will last 2 years, and then after that, bargaining will begin again without arbitration. And I do believe the point needs to be made. These workers are deserving of a contract. They have voted and they've been legally accepted, as having formed a union, having selected that union as their sole agent of representation, and they need the contract to be able to protect for their rights. That's right. And they're being denied those. Doing a little research beforehand, I found it amusing. Was looking at the Heritage Foundation's website, and they have a Heritage in Focus video series, and they ask the question, is binding arbitration actually good for workers? And I'll try to hold back my smugness and amusement here. They said, without the union under the current system, you can go to your boss and say, I've been productive. I deserve my raises, my wages, and increased benefits. That you have that obligation, to do better by yourself. Lift yourself up by your bootstraps. Right. Okay, we can see how well that actually goes on. And under the collective bargaining side, when you have a union, you come together, you bargain for a contract, the management side and the union side, and then they reach an agreement and you ratify the contract for those benefits. If you don't, you strike. I like the extreme that they try to juxtapose there. And they say under the Employee Free Choice Act, you're building in this element of the binding arbitration, which is pulling an outside government third party, and of course, they're not too fond on the outside third party government agent coming into the employer sphere, and they're going to impose these rules on the employer. And the argument that they're trying to make is that it's illegal for you to strike under those circumstances, so you're losing your recourse for action. And it's illegal for the employer to then, because you have a 2-year binding rule, to give any higher wages, certainly out of the goodness of their heart, even if productivity allows for it. I'm not sure if how you want to address all of that
well, again, I think
confusion.
In most circumstances, the availability of outside arbitration, binding arbitration, is really going to put pressure on both sides to come to a voluntary agreement. There will be times, obviously, when arbitration will end up having to solve this conflict because neither the employer nor the union can do it on their own. But most of the time, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, they also make the point that the government doesn't necessarily know what's in the best interest for the company. And I've heard the threat put out there that it could end up in bankruptcy, and then the workers that have gone through the organizing process would then be out of a job. Right. So what good is it to them to ever go toward a binding arbitration?
Arbitration is a profession. The presumption,
very much a skilled.
It's a very skilled profession. The presumption is, and there are arbitrations in all kinds of contexts which business likes. They're just not in this particular arena do they want outside arbitrators. We have arbitrators deciding and solving all kinds of business problems, business-to-business problems. But in this case, the assumption is the arbitrator is going to have access to financial information of the company. It would make no sense for an arbitrator to impose contract terms, which is going to drive the company to bankruptcy. It's going to look at the demands of the workers, the ability of the company to satisfy those, and try to find a middle path, again, to get over that first hurdle of a contract for 2 years, and then the two sides will go back to bargaining on their own.
Absolutely, and I think you hit the nail on the head there. The Heritage in Focus video that I watched, one of the closing lines was, "Let's not put government in charge of our economic success." And I do.
Because business has done such a good job.
Well, I was going to beg the question, whose economic success were they most interested in? Was it on the part of the company or that of the worker?
That's right. That's right.
So yeah, the binding, I think you've made the point very well. The binding arbitration is as a last resort.
It is a last resort.
You're going through 90 days of negotiations, as any contract does, and then you referred it to mediation, and either side can do that.
Right.
And then as a last resort, the binding arbitration.
That's right. And the specter of an arbitrator making this decision, I think, will bring both labor and business to terms prior to the binding arbitration.
I think you're right there. I'd like to open up the phone lines again. Are you out there, and have you ever had to negotiate your own wages? Are you one of those productive individuals that have had to go face-to-face with your employer and ask for an increase in your wages? Or are you a union member involved in a contract campaign, or a union organizer is currently going through one? Let us know what your experiences are in the process. I know it's a very difficult time in one's life, and we'd like to be able to share that with the viewing audience. If we have a moment, I'd like to share one more video with you. I think this takes into account, with a little tongue-in-cheek humor, a couple of the components that we've been talking about. One, having the secret ballot election, and being able to negotiate with your boss, and perhaps even the binding arbitration. If you could take a look with me here.
Hi, I'm Charles Bigman, CEO. I want to personally welcome you to your new job and tell you a few things you need to know as an employee here. You've been offered a salary that's unique and special, just like you. In fact, your salary is based on rigorous research into your background: race, chest size, golf handicap, smell test, and whether your dad was in my class at Princeton. Another great thing about working here is you don't have to sign a contract. All that legal mumbo-jumbo and excessive paperwork guaranteeing your rights, who needs it? Well, I have a contract, but I'm the CEO. Great for staff motivation. The fear that you could lose your job at any moment helps keep you at your peak performance. I'd like to review a few common reasons for being fired. Please pay attention. Pregnancy, military service, getting old, getting fat, potential future pregnancy. And of course, talking about unions with your coworkers. That's a big one. You'll definitely appreciate this. Last quarter, our profit margins were through the roof. I bought the Wave Song. That's my new yacht. And I decided to give something back to my employees. A special cooler with soda. We pride ourselves on having a strong, powerful workforce. I like to call it our no wussies policy. That means no health care, sick days, paid vacation, or I just had a baby leave to distract you from work. How can you concentrate on your job if you're off sipping margaritas or in the hospital? It's impossible. We take care of our employees here. We have a first aid kit and some hand sanitizer. That always reminds me of hard work. Now, before I forget, you may have heard of a new bill in Congress called the Employee Free Choice Act. People say that could make life better for workers. Let me tell you, that's nonsense. If it becomes easier for you to form a union, then it becomes harder for me to buy one of those private islands in Dubai. You see, we're all in this company together. Thanks so much for joining the family. Now get to work.
Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed our little tongue-in-cheek humor there. That video was produced by American Rights at Work, and we do encourage all of those 62 million, I believe the figure is, workers out there that have expressed an interest in joining the union, but aren't necessarily encouraged by the prospects that exist under our current National Labor Relations Act law. Do you want to take a stab at, maybe an interpretation of that video? There's a lot of truth behind the humor there.
It is. It tells a real story with tongue planted firmly in cheek. The notion that their employer is so beneficent, bends over backwards to make sure workers are paid fairly, that they get the benefits they think they deserve and the time off when they're sick. This happens in some workplaces, but by and large workers have to struggle for those kind of benefits, particularly in today's economy.
What can I say? I'm a softie.
Very competitive world out there. Companies have to compete with each other. They have to compete with companies that aren't union. And of course, one of the problems is as the number of workers covered under collective bargaining declines, it forces their companies into a competitive disadvantage with those companies that don't have unions. They're competing against companies with lower wages that don't have health insurance costs. And as the world becomes increasingly connected, we're competing with companies overseas that may not provide, or governments that don't protect basic rights. But I think the basic argument we make is that this should be a race to the top, not a race to the bottom. Our government should would sort of provide that opportunity. On the side of workers, not companies. We think the employee free choice.
By passing this piece of legislation, it doesn't mean that union membership is going to go through the roof, but it is providing that fundamental, access to choice. We're in a simple one-step process. You sign a union authorization card. The employer's forced to recognize that union. So in a moment, we're going to be talking about the stronger penalties and the employee free choice. We'll be with you in a moment.
Put off dealing with diabetes, and you might not have a leg to stand on. You might not have to face it. Eventually, you might not have to bother. Diabetes doesn't have to take apart your life, not if you eat healthy, exercise, and take your medicine to control your blood sugar.
I'm controlling my diabetes. It's making a huge difference.
Control your diabetes for life. Call 1-800-860-8747.
You've probably heard about heart disease, but did you know that it's the #1 killer of women nationwide? Heart disease claims more.
Not giving our employees a contract is.
But there are steps you can take to protect yourself against it. Contact your local American Heart Association or visit their website. For more information on how you can prevent heart disease, contact your local American Heart Association or visit their website at www.americanheart.org. Lives each year than breast cancer, lung cancer, or strokes combined.
Would you go to the end of your driveway? Would you cross a street? Would you go if you could use your knowledge to teach someone? And in the process, maybe learn something yourself. Life is calling. How far?
Why don't you just wash your car at home?
When I wash my car, everything runs down the street and down into the storm drains. With all the chemicals and the soaps and waxes, the last it's all contained and recycled on site. That's why I also take my car in for oil changes instead of doing it myself. I might take a chance on spilling stuff. You know what the best part is?
What?
More time to kick back and watch the game.
Welcome back. We're on the Inside Scoop Virginia, and we're talking about a national piece of legislation, which is the simple one-step process to joining.
The thing I want to do is poison my own drinking water. At least here.
A union called Majority Card Check Sign Up. We've also talked about how there is the option for binding arbitration in the case of a dispute when it goes to the first contract. Now we're going to go on to the last component of this piece of legislation, which is the penalties attached to I guess, the unfortunate aspects of a contract campaign and an organizing campaign. I do have with me Bill Samuel, who is the Director of Government Affairs for the AFL-CIO. Bill, would you like to describe this third component, the penalties attached to the Employee Free Choice Act?
And actually, I think it takes a little bit of background over the decades since the National Labor Relations Act first passed. The fact is, in recent years, employers have violated workers' basic rights to form unions and be protected against illegal activity to the tune of about 30,000 a year. About 30,000 cases a year where employers have violated basic worker rights trying to form unions and win representation. The reason is there are no penalties for violating the National Labor Relations Act. There are no real financial penalties, certainly no criminal penalties. Companies can violate the law almost with impunity. Worker or makes a statement that would be considered coercive, the only penalty, and by the way, this penalty will normally come months if not years later because of the process for deciding whether or not a company has violated the law. The only penalty is that the employer will have to post a notice in the workroom saying they will no longer commit those violations. There's no financial penalty, there's no criminal penalties under our anti-discrimination laws, for example. People would be very upset. They wouldn't tolerate it. In fact, most of our workplace discrimination laws and other civil laws have much tougher penalties than the National Labor Relations Act. The only monetary penalty available is if a worker is illegally fired. Again, the case works its way through the process. It can be 2 or 3 years later. If the employer is found to have done that illegally, the employer will have to rehire the worker with back pay. Now, if you're a large employer and you've got a workforce of several hundred or several thousand, and you think by firing a lead organizer or 2 or 3 workers who are interested in the union, and the worst penalty you're going to suffer at the end of the process is having to hire them back 2 or 3 or 4 years later and pay them back wages, it's going to be worth it to you. And that's, in fact, the calculation most companies have made. They violate the law, they believe they can do it with impunity, and they're basically right. So the third section of this act, of the Employee Free Choice Act, triple back pay in the case where workers are fired. Basically provides much tougher penalties illegally, and also the National Labor Relations Board can step in right away and sanction employers who commit these kinds of violations. So we think putting them activity and illegal behavior would help restore the balance in the workplace.
I believe the fines are pretty hefty. I'd read $200,000 per violation.
Violations in place that would discourage illegal. That's right.
And usually,
and triple back pay.
If there are such violations, if it's sunk to that point, which it often does.
Right now, if an employer illegally threatens,
there's not just a single violation.
That's right.
If you could hold on for one moment, I believe we have a caller on the line. We have Joyce from Clifton. Are you there, Joyce?
Yes, I am. Thank you. I just wanted to call and mention another benefit for allowing workers to join a union. We have so many people that have been laid off. Our contract and in our negotiations, people.
We've talked about how the situation for workers has changed.
Good sized separation package. They would also get extended COPR benefits, which other company will pay for. So there were a lot of benefits put in there. It also protected people. The job, the company can TT that otherwise they would not have received, so they will have medical care that the company will pay for. So there were a lot of perhaps from instead of being accessed out of a person who would be losing their position into another job in the company. So it really is allowing us to save jobs, and at the same time, if someone does get accessed out of a job, they will have benefits they would not have had with a private company. The other item I was going to ask if you could explain is who chooses the board for the National Labor Relations Board? How do they get to be in that position? Who chooses them?
Sure. The National Labor Relations Board has 5 members, and they're chosen by the President and confirmed by the Senate. The President's party has the majority. The 3 members will be from the President's party. In this case, 3 seats are occupied by Republicans and 2 by Democrats. If a Democrat wins in November, that will switch. And among those 5, 1 is the chairman, and that chairperson is chosen by the President again. The benefits of unions for workers who are going through financial difficulties.
I believe this one was outsourcing.
Or outsourcing. Have these golden parachutes and all kinds of benefits when they're in financial trouble. The workers without a union have no recourse when a company's in trouble. A company can outsource, can downsize, can fire with or without benefits. Basically, its own choice whether or not to do that. Having a union of that separation or that downsizing or that outsourcing, and I think most people think that's pretty fair.
I know, and that's it's a tough position to be in. And even if you have a union, you're caught kind of between a rock and a hard place.
That's right. That's right. Well, this is, the economy is, we're going through a very rough period now. I think workers feel very anxious, and I think they feel powerless, which is maybe the worst feeling people have. And I think back in the middle of the last century, 1/3 of the workforce were covered by unions, by union contracts. We had cycles of boom and bust, but they were much more manageable when workers could join together and determine some of this for themselves, how this economy would be handled and how the company would handle it. Today, workers are pretty much on their own.
Absolutely. Now, we've had actually quite a series of emails that have come in during this show, and they all seem to have the same slant to them. They're talking about right to work state laws and how there's a complete misunderstanding of those laws. And actually, they're a little bit angry, but maybe not in the...
Provide some opportunity for the workers to negotiate the term.
The regards that you and I might expect from being, as this show is hosted in Virginia. I have Vance from Prince William is saying, I'd like to know the truth, and I'm going to read this email, it's a little lengthy, about right-to-work states are not made more public. Most legislators don't know what the right-to-work law does or why they would oppose it, or they would oppose it unless they are capitalist and care more about businesses than they do the people who elect them. The facts are that in non-right-to-work states, the average income is about $7,000 a year higher, and close to 20% more people have health insurance than in right-to-work states. In turn, it costs the state less money. As it does not have to subsidize as much health. Percent more people have health insurance than in right-to-work states. Which lowers the cost to the state and to the taxpayers. The only advantage of right to work is completely to keep more money in the pocket of workers by keeping their wages lower and benefits low if they have any at all, and it keeps the state more money. I think I know where he's going there. The fact is that there are thousands of union employees all over the country that make money and treat their employees fairly, that have been in business for a long time, while also at the same time good for the state.
Yeah, well, actually, two good points that the writer put forward. One is that there are a lot of workers who are joining unions through majority sign-up. Major corporations agree voluntarily to this. As I said, it's always been allowed as a voluntary matter. It's only fairly recently that employers were given the option of demanding an election. And by the way, under the Employee Free Choice Act
of business. The problem with right to work is that it exploits.
This act does not eliminate it. It simply says it will be up to the workers to decide whether they want an election or this majority sign-up. But there are hundreds of thousands of workers becoming union members and forming unions at work through majority sign-up now. Singular Wireless and AT&T is a major corporation which has agreed to this on a voluntary basis. So
I do believe locally some of the Hilton chains came under contract.
In the hospitality industry, many employers have agreed to make. Workers can still choose to have a secret ballot election. Employee Free Choice majority sign-up, I think they see the elimination of conflict as a good thing for the business, and if workers want to form a union, they willingly accept that.
Absolutely. Maybe you can clear up for me, because I've also heard this in talking to some of my Chamber of Commerce friends that think that this piece of legislation somehow will impact right-to-work laws.
Right. Virginia is a right-to-work state, and we all know that. Employee Free Choice Act has nothing to do with that. The right to work really has to do with whether or not, when a union is voted in or signed up through majority sign-up, whether or not workers will have to pay dues. That's all right to work says, that in a right to work state, workers can't be required to join the union or pay dues. It's right to work is really an effort by companies and conservative politicians to weaken unions. If they can't collect dues, they can't do the job they have to do by law, which is represent workers.
Which I always find amusing, that when it comes to talking about unions, it always comes back down to the dues dollars, as though that we're a company that is hell bent on collecting the dime out of every hard-earned paycheck. When this money, the dues money, goes towards representation.
Right, and people should understand that in non-right to work states, in no state, in fact, in the United States, can you be forced to join a union. In a non-right to work state, you can be required, going to work at a union represented firm, to pay some what they call agency fee, something for the cost required to do by law, but you do not have to become a union member.
All right. Well, I want to thank you, Bill. I think we've uncovered a lot of maybe the misunderstandings with this crucially important piece of legislation, not just to labor, but to business. The Employee Free Choice Act, the simple one-step card check, sign up that will allow it easier for people to enter the ranks of unionism. The mediation and the arbitration that will allow it to be easier to get a first contract. And then, of course, the penalties that are attached on the side in the case of unscrupulous employers. I'd want to announce that we are this is the inaugural show in our brand new virtual studio. There's not a desk in front of us. There's not any of these fancy little gizmos that you might actually see. And our boys in the studio, I do believe, may have, as they're playing with the prompts. I'm sure this will be a wonderful venue for Fairfax public access in the future.